Good evening, cohort. Plausible ways of falling short. Oh, there are so many of them, right? Well, this week, David Smith reminds us once again about that ethnocentric concept of how we have it all going on. We have the best language, the best culture, and we think that we have the best belief system. As he terms it, we are pure. Up to this point, he has shown us the importance of opening our minds to new ways of living and doing and believing in our attempts to learn from and love the stranger. How shocking, then, for him to suggest that a prevalent thought is that really opening up to people from a different culture might, in fact, be a betrayal of our Christian identity, that we could be then led astray. I know that I've heard that many times from people who think it's best to avoid people who are different because they could somehow convince us that we were wrong in what we believe. So it's just best to avoid them altogether. But consider this, Smith says. Can a voice of the cultural stranger push me closer to God's kingdom, not further away? Perhaps a better way to look at it is as an opportunity for our own spiritual renewal. It's good to question ourselves, I think, to reaffirm our beliefs, to remember and celebrate our own foundations. One point that Smith makes is the way in which God sustains creation and human society by sharing a multitude of gifts through his good grace, demonstrating no favoritism. Speaking of that, the phrase that really bothers me is, when something unfortunate happens to someone else, "There but for the grace of God go I," as though people who have unfortunate things happen to them are just not worthy of God's grace. Well, I love Smith's description of what a typical Christian would be. Many people think of a pure, chaste white person, something like a Mormon, who exudes Christian characteristics, when, in fact, Smith reminds us of Philip Jenkins' description of the changing face of Christianity, more like a woman living in a village in Nigeria or Brazil. Now that would be shocking to a lot of people, but Smith encourages us not to respond in fear or disdain to others not like us, but to pay attention to the planks in our own eyes and in loving attentiveness to our neighbor. Speaking of that, how often do we truly engage people who fall outside our own comfort zone? I suppose it's natural to be a bit uneasy with someone who is vastly different from us, but there's only one way to get comfortable. That is, to invite them in. Not just for a meal or social activity of some kind, but inviting them to join us in our lives, to become part of our churches, for example. The vast majority of churches I know of tend to attract only a certain kind of homogeneous group. Again, we seem to only want our own kind, which is truly a shame. And then, when we travel somewhere outside of our own zone, we seem obsessed with the impression people from another culture leave on us without, again, learning from the stranger and being impressed with the people themselves. Not just in a, "can I take your picture" kind of way, but in a, "let me stand beside you and begin to learn" kind of a way. That truly answers the call to love thy neighbor. One thing that really surprised me in the book Loving the Stranger was Smith's point that the predominance of English around the world was not, as I had assumed, related to simple business and industry, but rather to the history of global language, traced through the successful expeditions by soldier, sailor, speakers. World domination. Yet, and we are still arrogant enough to think English will and should work everywhere in the world, no matter where we go. And yet, only a quarter of the world's population actually speaks English, meaning that 3/4 of the world's population does not. We sure don't act that way. We act as though everyone in the world should kowtow to us, cultural imperialists that we are. Do unto others, Smith reminds us once again. It all comes back to the good Samaritan's love of neighbor in truly living the Word of God. Thank you.